All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. If you haven't signed in, please do sign in. We do like having those numbers. And as always, if you don't want to voice your criticisms to my face, you can throw it into the questions. I will read them as best as I can. I might get caught up in things. If I don't see it, I'm sorry. Yell at me.
Really
Then I'll look
quick,
at it.
say goodbye, G1. Bye, G1. Is he just here for the pizza?
Isn't that what we're really all here for? Just the pizza, guys. Come on. All right.
If you're SFS, go upstairs. All right, we're done. You, get out of here. I don't like you. You in particular.
Okay. So, topic for today. We're doing our exploitation series. So we're going to be going to a bunch of things about breaking stuff, which is always fun because fun things happen when things break. Specifically, we're going to be talking about how to actually break into some domain services, which is why we call this cracking the domain. Except we're doing it for fun and profit because we're hackers. I mean, come on. We only do things for fun and profit. That's a joke. We're not advocating anything, not anything legal or anything like that. But gaining knowledge is Oh, you're right, little blurb that came out of nowhere. That's so convenient of you. So this is for fun and profit, obviously. Before we get into that, we're going to get into some announcements. So this week on Friday, is that Friday? No, tomorrow. Tomorrow, Square CTF is starting, so if you're into CTFs, you can go ahead and join that. We might have a open lab for it. We haven't picked any times yet, so if we do, we will let you know in the announcements on the Discord channel. October 21st, we'll have another corporate talk. We'll have the Cambrian Cyber Group coming with us. After that, we'll have Alchemy, however you pronounce that, on the 28th. We have our Fire Talks on the 30th. I realize that nobody's signed up for one of these yet. I am kind of disappointed. I'm tired of giving presentations. I want to hear you guys talk. So if you don't know what the Fire Talks is, we do little short presentations that you guys give to us, about like 5 to 10 minutes, about something you've done in security, something you've made, something that you know, just something quick that you just want to tell us about. We've had pretty good success with it over the past few semesters. We like doing it. People here seem to like doing it. So if you're interested in giving talk, the link is going to be in the Discord. We'll link it again just in case people can't find it. But please do sign up. We do like doing that. We like to hear from you guys what you're getting from these meetings as well. After Fire Talks, we'll be doing TI. We'll be hosting them on November 4th. And last thing is officer applications. Hey, this is a cool group that you're attending called CSG. They're looking for officers. We want you, so sign up, please. We have 2 officer positions open, so sign up for those. All right. So first thing I need to go into is what the frickin' heck is a network domain? Everybody keeps saying I'm on the domain, you're on the domain, he's on the domain. What the heck is a domain? So a network domain is defined as an administrative grouping of multiple private computer networks or hosts within the same infrastructure. It is usually controlled by what we call a domain controller. It's a service that basically automates all the logins, all the user groups, and basically how the architecture of your whole network is laid out. Basically, it's an easy way to logically put all your physical systems into kind of like a logic representation of your network. These are typically done on Microsoft servers. Most of the time, you'll probably hear things like Kerberos, Active Directory, which I'm going to tell you about tonight. It makes it so you don't have to individually set up systems every time you bring one on up. You can basically plug it into your domain, connect it, and push a bunch of configurations to it without having to do it for each individual system. So you could set up 10 machines and say, push all these policies to these systems on this area in the domain. Makes it much easier, and it makes all your sysadmins happy because they don't have to do as much work.
Sysadmins are lazy.
That is true. Sometimes we are lazy because we have to do a lot of things, and I don't like doing a lot of things, so I don't do a lot of things. So, what do I want out of this? We're doing exploitation. I want to break into stuff. So, generally in a pen test, your idea is typically to take the system, or if you're pen testing a network, to control the entire network. I want to own everything that you have. I want to become your domain admin and be able to push all the configurations that I want so you can't do anything about it. that is kind of the general idea when you're trying to do a pen test of a giant network. The domain controller is the kind of the big daddy system of everything. It kind of controls what the architecture looks like. It tells all the systems what policies they have to follow. Most of the time, there could be a few domain controllers. There could be one, depending on how big your system is. It's usually manned by what we call a domain admin. This is the granddaddy of all admins. It's like the Jesus of admins on your system, I guess you could say. It's the guy who basically can dictate what happens, what goes on your system. So, to put it short, when I'm doing a pen test, I want to be the freaking domain admin. I want to own everything you have, and this guy can do it. And you can kind of see in the bottom right, this is kind of how a pen test goes. It's circular in a sense because most of the time you break into a single system, you kind of loop back into enumeration of that system, you break into more system, you keep going and going and going until you get your domain admin, and now you own the domain. So how do I become this big daddy admin? Well, there are multiple things you could do. You could phish the admin to get his credentials, you could break in through web stuff, you could persuade the admin, sorry, typo. You could actually physically connect to the domain controller if you're that sly breaking in. I don't care about that. That's not what I'm talking about tonight. You could do that, that's lame. What I want to do is I want to abuse the domain architecture, how it's set up to laterally move through the system. I want to abuse your Active Directory, how you set up your permissions and do things that you're not intending for me to do. I want to exploit your services, maybe like your Kerberos, maybe your single sign-on stuff. I want to just take abuse of all your things that control your entire network. That's what we want, and that's what we're going to do tonight. So before I actually get into more of the attack type of stuff, I need to talk about what the heck is this Active Directory thing I keep talking about. So Active Directory is a service that authenticates and authorizes all computers and users in a domain, assigning and enforcing security policies, which we call GPOs, Global Policy Objects, for all computers. It is basically we're a collection where we keep all of your systems, where you keep all your information about your users, anything that's on your network domain. We're going to keep all the information there so we can easily find everything about your domain in that system. It runs on a protocol which we call LDAP typically, the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. That's not super important, but if you hear people shouting LDAP, LDAP, that's what they're talking about. It can hold data about users for what they're allowed to access on specific systems. Permissions can be assigned to a group of people through an AD group. So if you want to, like here at UTD, we're probably under most of the AD group, probably for CS specifically, so we can access the CS servers here. So we have those type of groups that give us specifically permissions to access certain systems in our domain. It can do more things. There's certificate servers, there's federation servers, there's rights management, there's just a bunch of other things. Can I lick your beard? No, please don't. I'm gonna call the cops. Please don't do that. That's assault. Y'all are weird. This is a quick just visual representation using an Active Directory application. So you can see on the left you have your computers, your domain controllers, your users, everybody stacked up. You can have all of your user groups, quick explanations of what they are. And below all that you have your GPO policies, which are basically your giant policies that you're going to push on either systems or a group of users to quickly enact security policies and stuff like that. So the way it's set up is I'm going to go through 3 different types of attacks or 3 different scenarios that we're going to do on domain services. The first one, we're going to attack the domain by exploiting its architecture, maybe starting from a system where we kind of have some leeway. We can download some executables, run some stuff on some systems. Then we'll go into attacking a single machine by exploiting the domain's Kerberos system. This is going to be starting from maybe you're on the system, but you can't really download things. You can't put more stuff on the system. You can kind of only work with what you got. And the third one is I'm going to own the whole freaking domain through the Kerberos system. And this, I'm not even going to be on the system. I'm going to do it from my remote shell and break into your system. Makes it easier. All right, so the first one. You're inside a network. System is kind of flexible, allows you to download anything, doesn't really complain about you. You don't have Windows, Defender yelling at you, trying to delete all your crap. They don't do that. You're currently a user on the system. I'm trying to escalate to an admin. The system's large, there's a lot of users going around. I don't really know where to go from here, and all of my enumeration is kind of hard, I guess you could say. And when you're looking around the system, there's not anything like, nobody's leaving a password laying around, nobody wrote anything on a freaking sticky note, nothing easy for me. So I want to take advantage of the Active Directory architecture and try to figure out, is there a path from where I am currently to maybe get to some higher privilege or maybe some admin? So I'm going to use a tool called Bloodhound. Bloodhound is basically a tool that collects all the information about the Active Directory of the system that it knows and represents it using some kind of graph theory. So it's going to give me a graph of all the users and all the groups on the system, and I can be able to path out where exactly I need to get to and maybe the shortest path to a certain user or something like that. This really helps cut down on enumeration time because it presents everything in a nice GUI. You can look at the graph. I can type in, I'm this guy, I want to get to this group, how do I get there? And this should present a quick, easy path on how to get there pretty fast. What's a Kerberos system? I'm going to actually explain that later, so I'm going to hold off on that one. What's a Kerberos system? Again, I'm going to explain it. What is an LDAP? Does Microsoft AD use it or integrate? AD is built on top of LDAP. LDAP is basically the protocol that it uses to query the information stored inside of Active Directory. So it's basically the protocol that Active Directory uses. I don't think there's any other ones. You're trying to trip me up right now, man? All right, so I'm going to go to a quick... I want to show off Bloodhound real fast, so let me start up Bloodhound. Log into it. So I got this information for an Active Directory based off of a Hack the Box machine. If you don't know what Hack the Box is, it's basically a free pen testing website where they put up virtual machines for you to purposely break into and to practice pen testing and stuff like that. All right. So I ran a separate PowerShell script on the machine that collected all this information, put it into a zip file, brought it back to my machine, I imported into Bloodhound. So this is kind of how it looks like when you first start. It tells you how many computers there are, how many groups it found, any access control lists, stuff like that. So if I go to queries over here, I can go down to some of these pre-built ones. So I want to see the shortest path to all the high value targets it thinks I can get to. So if I do that, click the domain. So this is going to bring me a big old graph of all of the high value targets it thinks that you can get to from wherever on the system. And all these edges have all these words around them. It basically says to get from this node to this node, you're probably going to have to exploit this actual property of the Active Directory or maybe a permission of this user. So if I were, let's say on the system, I am Tom, and I want to get to the backup admins group. So it breaks it down. So if I am Tom over here, I could get to Claire, and if I get to Claire, I could basically get to the backup admins through these edges. And if I were to right-click this, it tells me more information about the property I'm trying to abuse. So it says the user Tom has the ability to modify the owner of the user Claire. Object owners retain the ability to modify objects, security descriptors, regardless of the permissions of their discrete access control list. And it can even tell me how to actually break that. It will actually give you commands to use to actually take over this user. In this sense, I would probably try to take ownership of this user and rewrite their password to something I know so I can be able to log into them. It's a really cool tool if you ever do any like Hack the Box machines and you see an Active Directory and you want to find some kind of unique vectors around things. I highly recommend Bloodhound. It's just kind of fun to use. It can help for blue teaming too, so if you're setting up an Active Directory system, you're trying to squash all of your edges to anything malicious, you can use this too to find out where you're vulnerable from.
I actually got to use Bloodhound at my job a couple weeks ago, specifically for that, because we were doing some security hardening on our Active Directory. And yes, exactly. It's mentality. Think like the hacker, and you get to
Yep, that's how blue teaming kind of goes. You want to know what red teamers are going to do before they actually do it, so that is one thing. Why is your password so insecure? Well, it's a Kali instance. I don't care. That's really it. It's just a one-off. How do you run Microsoft PowerShell on a Linux system? There is a PowerShell extension for Linux, isn't there?
Yep, actually with the new .NET Core, which is the .NET runtime that's built on free open source and it's cross-platform, they now have PowerShell Core on top of it, so you can run PowerShell commands on a Linux machine. What's more fun is you can actually use that for remote PowerShell administration on Windows machines from a Linux computer.
If this is more the reference where I said I ran a PowerShell script and then pulled it to my machine, I was remoted into a Windows machine and ran the PowerShell script, not from my Linux machine, if that's what you're curious about. What is blue teaming? It's basically the opposite of red teaming. So instead of attacking system, you're trying to defend the system. You're trying to harden it to make sure that people can't break into it. So that's how security kind of goes. It's either blue teaming or red teaming. There's this thing called purple teaming, but it doesn't really exist, to be honest.
What's the history of that? Like,
I have no idea, to be honest.
like video games, like you have red teams, blue teams.
Might be like a cops and robbers thing. I don't really know.
Well,
What information do you need to provide to Bloodhound? So Bloodhound comes with these things that they call ingesters. So they're basically little PowerShell scripts. You basically would put the PowerShell script onto your target system, run a command, I think it's called invoke Bloodhound, tell it to collect all the information you have. It'll basically grab all the information and put it into a zip file, bring that zip file back, and you just upload that zip file to Bloodhound, and it'll process everything and create your graphs and everything like that. Is there a cool hacker term for impersonating users to get to the next segment of a network? I think you might be looking for the word spoofing, maybe? I'm not sure exactly a specific term. Most of the time, when you're impersonating something, you're typically spoofing it. I think so. I'm not sure exactly what you're looking for there.
you normally like pop a server, I guess, but a user isn't. You don't pop a server for a user, do you?
Yeah, you could pop root.
Pop root?
Sure. So, before I talk about the next attack, I need to explain two topics. One being this Kerberos thing that I keep throwing around, and a concept which we call NTLM relay attacks. I'll get into that a little bit shortly. So, what is this Kerberos thing I keep talking about? UTD has a Kerberos server. What does it actually do? So Kerberos is a network authentication protocol that works on tickets for allowing nodes over the network to prove their identity in a secure manner. It works on a system that we call ticket granting tickets and ticket granting services. So I'll explain that in the next slide. I have a better thing for that. Typically, to get these TGS, ticket granting services, you'll have to have a registered service principal name. This will be more important later on when we actually get into the attack. So this is how Kerberos works in a nutshell. When I log into a service, you basically put out a request to your domain controller saying, hey, I want to access services on the domain. Give me a ticket granting ticket. Once you authenticate with your domain controller, it says, okay, here's your ticket granting ticket. And it's basically just a hash giant value in a sense. Then when I want to access service, let's say for us, it's like e-learning or Galaxy or something like that. I give that ticket granting ticket to the domain controller and saying, hey, here's my ticket. Give me another ticket that's going to give me access to that service, which is a TGS. It comes back with a TGS saying, okay, your ticket is valid. It hasn't expired. Here's your TGS for that service. I basically give that ticket to the service that I want to authenticate to, and it checks to make sure you have the right permissions. And it says, okay, this is a valid TGS. You should be good. All right, here's access to the system. Here's what you can access. That's kind of how it works in a nutshell. It's basically, I have an overall ticket that allows me to get more tickets for services. And I have very specific tickets that allow me to access services, if that makes sense. I'm sorry. I know this is going to be kind of confusing if you've never heard this before. If you have questions, stop me. I'll try to explain it better. It's a little complicated.
We do this instead of like actually handing our username and password to service A and service B, so that we, again, as a sysadmin, I'm lazy. My domain controller, I'm going to have to assume is secure, so I'm going to make sure that that is secure. Service A and service B may not be secure. I don't want my users necessarily handing the username and password to that. But if they're authenticating against the domain controller and then using a ticket to get into service A or service B, those services never have to see my username and password. They just get to see the tickets.
Yeah, the whole idea of these services is to reduce the amount of times that you're actually sending credentials to things. We want you to not send us credentials to too many things, and we want to limit the amount of systems that actually know your credentials. You don't want all these services to know your credentials, because that means if they break into one system, they could break into every single system. We kind of want it into a single place that's really hard to get into, in a sense. And there's kind of a weird thing that that Kerberos kind of needs to do sometimes. If you're accessing, let's say, the service A, maybe it needs information or it needs to do something to another service for you. So we typically, Kerberos calls that delegation, or allows you to impersonate a person on behalf of someone. So service A impersonating you, the user, to access service B. There's three main ways that it does that. It's an unconstrained delegation, which basically when I give a TGS to a service to authenticate to it, at the same time I also give them my TGT, my ticket granting ticket. So when the service needs to impersonate me or access another service, it uses my ticket granting ticket to get more ticket granting services, the TGSs. On the other hand, there's constrained delegation, which instead of using the ticket granting ticket, it uses the ticket granting service to get more access to other services and stuff like that. We're not super concerned about those because most of the time you're probably going to be under constrained delegation for security purposes. But there's this really odd one, which is called a protocol transition. It allows services to request a TGS on users arbitrarily. So you could just have e-learning over here as a service and just saying, I need to impersonate you. I'm going to do it. I don't care if you don't let me. I'm going to do it anyway. That's fine. You don't care. That's basically what it does. So it could just basically say, I want to be this person real quick. I don't want to ask them. I'm just going to do it. It seems kind of bizarre why it would do things like that. So that's kind of a nutshell in Kerberos. I don't expect you to understand everything about it, but just get a general overview of what it is. The second thing I need to talk about for the second attack is what we call a NTLM relay attack. So this is, NTLM means, what is that, Network Transition LAN Manager? I think that's what it means. It's basically a protocol that Microsoft uses to authenticate between services and stuff like that. But it can be used in a malicious way. So it can basically be used in what we call a man-in-the-middle attack. So I can sit in the middle of a communication and relay the authentication messages wherever I want them to. So in this way, the client sends a negotiation to a server. I'm in the middle as an attacker. The server wants to challenge me. This is a challenge protocol, so I have to answer a question so it knows that it's actually the client talking to them and not someone in the middle. But if they pass a challenge to me, I could pass it back to the client. Client answers it for me, and I could just take that answer and authenticate myself onto the server and just don't relay anything back to the client. So basically, I'm hijacking his session to the server by using his credentials, by making him actually answer the questions and stuff like that. This isn't super important to know exactly the details of how it works. Just know that briefly how it works, and we're going to be using this in the next attack. So scenario 2, which we call wagging the dog. Sounds weird, but that's what it's called. So there's some weird kind of unique features that both the Windows and the Kerberos system does. Kerberos offers another type of delegation. We have those three that I talked about, but those were kind of tight and too restrictive. So they came up with another one called resource-based constrained delegation. This allows a service, instead of having a domain controller saying that person can impersonate you, a local admin on the system for that service has the ability now to say, I'm going to allow you to impersonate me. You can use my ID, go for it. Use my social security number. I don't care. Go for it. It's not useful to me. Basically, I can say who can impersonate me, who can be able to get access on my behalf. Makes sense. You should be able to say who can do what to you and stuff like that. So this could allow for an NTLM relay attack to set up this delegation on another service's behalf, granted if there's no signing. The way NTLM relay attacks are typically defeated is that they sign messages, so even though that you're hijacking their session, you won't be able to send any more messages because they're all signed. So the way around that is to hopefully authenticate without using signed messages. There's also kind of a weird behavior in Windows 10. Windows 10 has a WebDAV server. A WebDAV server is basically a web directory, so it's like accessing your C drive from a web page, in a sense, if you want to think about it like that. It has this installed by default, and they don't do message signing. Sounds like a little profit coming in right there. Also, when you change your account picture for your account on a Windows machine, the system is typically the highest account on a system. It has privileges to everything. It apparently opens the image when you change the picture. Kind of a weird thing it does. Seems kind of benign. What can you really do with that? But, I mean, I'm a simple man. I see system. I'm going for it. So there's some kind of information that seems like we could maybe set up an attack here. So this is how the attack works. Actually, let me go through questions real fast. Can you intercept a ticket granting ticket and use it? Technically, you possibly can do that. Most of the time, they're encrypted in a certain way that you can't actually understand what's inside of it. So passing it and trying to authenticate with that ticket might be kind of hard if you don't know the credentials behind it. Do you have an example of a service that might need to impersonate me? Let's see. Let's say you have e-learning and you're logging in, and we have this service called Box. If you don't know about it, it's kind of like Dropbox, so we can upload files and stuff to like that. Maybe you're trying to submit a file from Dropbox, so e-learning might need to access your Dropbox to figure out where that file is and where it's hosted. So e-learning might need to impersonate you through Box to access your files. That might be the closest thing I could think of for at least UTD.
Wait, are you saying UTD can see my files in Box?
Yes.
No way.
Don't put anything you don't want in there. Well, we don't want anybody seeing those. Oh, God. So, the attack this way, wagging the dog. So, I am an attacker. I am on a system that's hosting service B. I'm an authenticated user. I want to be an administrative user on the system that has service B. So I'm going to create a new service or a new account on that system called service A. I'm going to add a DNS record. So if you don't know what DNS is, that means domain name system. That's basically when you type Amazon.com, it translates that name into an IP address. That's what it basically does. So I'm going to put a DNS record in for service A, basically where my picture is. So my profile picture, I'm going to point it at a DNS record that points to this WebDAV server. I already explained that. You weren't paying attention. So I'm going to point it at this WebDAV server. When I change the picture of my account, we know that weird behavior that system opens the picture. This is where the NTLM relay attack comes in. So when I change the picture, the system has to authenticate to that WebDAV server to find the picture, which means it relays its credentials. So when it relays the credentials to that server, I can basically capture that authentication request and send it back out to the domain controller. So when it authenticates to me, I take its credentials, I redirect that back and saying, hey, I'm the local admin. I want to do something real fast to the domain real quick. It's totally me. I didn't take this from somewhere. And when I do that, I'm going to basically tell the domain controller that I want to set up a resource-based constraint delegation from service A to B. So basically, I want to tell the domain controller that's saying, let service A impersonate service B. So my malicious account should be able to impersonate the legitimate service B that I'm trying to compromise. So then I can use that service count A and request access to service B, that local admin on that system, and be able to escalate up. Sounds complicated, I know. I had to read this probably 3 times before I understood it. So instead of me explaining it, let's just watch them do it. It goes kind of fast, so I might pause a little bit in between. So this is them setting up this malicious WebDAV server on the actual legitimate host, account, or service. Making the DNS setup so it points to my WebDAV server, so when I change the actual image, it'll go to that server.
What's that hash?
Oh, sorry. I don't know what happened. No. Sorry.
Turn them all on. Turn them off, bro. Hello? Yeah, let's do it.
This?
Yeah, the hash right there.
That's the hash of the DNS server. It requires that for some reason to find it. Quick lookup, basically. I don't know why it does that, but yeah, that's just a Windows thing. So checks that it's up. So right here, it's just trying to show that the service that we just made, the account we just made, does not have any permissions to this service we're trying to hijack, or account, you could think of it as. In the system it is an account, but does not have any permissions to this account currently, which is shown right here. So it's going to change its picture. It's going to point at a remote destination, the remote web DAV server, and this is the pic we're trying to go for, but in this system it doesn't exist. We don't care if it grabs a picture at all. So it changed the picture. It didn't show the point where the relay did its thing. But basically, when we submitted the picture change, system went ahead and tried to authenticate to that remote WebDAV server and saying, hey, I'm looking for this image. Here's my authentication credentials. This is me trying to get in. We basically take those credentials, point them right back around, send them to the domain controller and saying, hey, this guy wants to give me permissions to him. It's legit. Trust me. And it worked. So right here, we now have our rogue account now has permission to delegate to this guy. And through some fun scripts that these guys developed, they basically are able to authenticate themselves and escalate all the way up to the system of the actual machine, and they can access anything on that machine now. So real quick, they're going to show here that if they try to look up the machine without using the credentials of their system or their rogue account, they can't. But if they use the ticket that allows them to escalate up, they can read anything on the system now. Yup. So kind of a unconventional way of doing things. Most people wouldn't think that I'm going to hack you through your profile picture. Imagine if Facebook was like that. We'd be all freaking screwed. So I got authentic access on a single machine. I don't freaking want that. I want Big Daddy Domain Admin. How do I get there? Well, this is scenario 3, which we call roasting the Kerberos. I don't want to impersonate just a service. I'd rather just be that guy. I want to be the domain admin. So here's a quick few more facts about Kerberos that we kind of need for this. To get a ticket granting ticket, you have to have, or you need a ticket granting ticket and a valid service provider name. Yeah. To get this TGS. And when you actually request these ticket granting services, your domain controller doesn't really track if you use them or not. They don't really care. They'll just give it out and say it expires at some point. I don't care if you use it. I don't care if you do anything with it. Have it. It doesn't really matter. But a ticket granting a TGS for a specific service is encrypted with the credentials of the service account registered with that service. It uses a RC4 HMAC. It uses an encryption that we can break. So when I get a ticket, it's encrypted with the service's credentials. That means if the domain controller has a service and I get a TGS for that domain controller service, it's encrypted with the domain controller's credentials. So that means if I can just crack those credentials and open the ticket, I can log in as the freaking domain controller, the domain admin. That seems like an oversight, doesn't it? So if we can generate an NTLM hash that opens the ticket, I know I have the domain admin's credentials. So the Kerberos attack is, well, what if you're, lazy sysadmin over here and you give your domain admin a service provider name? Well, I could just request a TGS for your domain admin and crack your hash. Profit? So if I have a ticket hash and I can generate a bunch of hashes, I can get the domain admin's password, something like that. That's a really, really specific password. I don't know why they did that. Okay, demo time. So, back into here with my poorly protected Kali instance. It's actually Tour. So the machine we're going to be doing is a Hack the Box machine. It is called Active on Hack the Box, so if you've done it before, this might look familiar. So typically when we do Hack the Box machines, we want to scan them first to figure out what's on the machine. Typically when I do it, I like to do mmap-sc, which basically runs a bunch of scripts on known services. So when it sees a service, it's going to run a bunch of more scripts on it to find more information. SV to enumerate the versions of the services if it can find out. -OA gives all the types of outputs, so a greppable format, an XML format, and just a text format. And then you do the IP address. I already did that because it kind of takes a while for this machine. So if we look at it real fast.
Can you make it bigger?
Sure.
Really quick, how many of you guys have actually done Hack the Box? Like raise hands.
Dude, look at all the hands.
How many of you guys know what Hack the Box even means? Okay, a few more. Cool. I just wanted to know. Sorry.
You know, I already explained what Hack the Box was earlier, but is that big enough?
Bigger.
Bigger? Jesus.
Size must be infinite.
Is that big enough for you?
Kind of, yeah, that's good.
You need glasses, boy. Jeez. All right. So first scan of the system, we can already tell there's a lot going on here. There is so many services open up. Not to be intimidated. This is kind of just a Windows thing. Windows has a thing called RPC, which is Remote Procedure Control Protocol. It's kind of what they default name all their services. So in general, half these services are not really important to us. They're just kind of normal things that Windows does. The things that kind of point out to us is these, sorry, hold on. That is not my backpack. Where'd my backpack go? Oh, it's behind me. I'm dumb. I'm done. Sorry. I'm sorry. I had to look for this real fast. Okay, you can turn back off now. Turn them off. We're vampires. All right. So the first things that kind of pop out to us is we see Kerberos on the system. That kind of points us towards we might be looking at some very high system on this domain, possibly domain controller. We also see that we have LDAP on the system. That probably means we have some kind of Active Directory running most of the time. We also see 445. 445, it says Microsoft DS. In reality, this means that it's hosting what we call an SMB server, which is basically a remote disk that you can connect to. So if you want to connect to like the C drive, you could be able to do that over SMB. If you're smart, you won't let people do that over the network because that's really freaking dumb, but some people do that. And we see some clocks used, so nothing else really crazy. So first things that pop out to me is the Kerberos. Maybe we can do something with that later. We see an LDAP server. We can maybe do something with that when we get on the system. The only thing that really stands out to me is this SMB. So we're basically going to go ahead and let me make sure I got my notes right so don't screw this up. So I want to poke at this SMB server fast. So I'm going to use a program called SMB Client. It's a Linux SMB client that allows you to connect to these shares. So I'm going to do an null authentication just to see what I can get to on this server without actually giving credentials. So get the IP address. So there's a bunch of shares on here. Some of these look kind of normal. Admins, a normal share. C is a normal share. IPC, that's normal. The only thing that seems kind of off on this machine is this replication share. I don't know about this being a normal share typically. So let's go ahead and connect to it. So we'll do SMB client again. And we'll do type of the IP address and the share we're trying to connect to. So replication. Don't need a password. All right, so we're on the SMB share now. Typically, when you get on an SMB share, if you can't do anything to exploit it, as in like try to get a reverse shell from it, you're typically just going to try to grab all the information you want on that. So you'll do something like recurse on, and then you'll do mget star, which basically gets every single file on this share. I already did that because it takes a while. So if we go into this is the SMB share. It's got some more folders in this. For this one, it has a lot of backup files, so these files are going to go super freaking far into it. Once you kind of scout out and enumerate this folder a little bit more, you're going to come across a file back here that we call groups.xml. This one seems kind of interesting because we have some user called svctgs. TGS sounds like ticket granting service to me. But we also have another field called cpassword. It seems like to this, when we actually look at this XML file, we might actually have a password here. Where is it? But we're also thinking, that doesn't look like a normal password. That looks encrypted. Well, here's where the gloriousness of Microsoft comes into play. So Microsoft encrypts all their passwords on their systems with an AES 256-bit encryption, but they all use the same key. Some brilliant developer decided to push the private key to the documentation, i.e. exposing every single key that Microsoft makes. If you were to do a little more enumeration on the system, you find out when it was created, and you find out this was actually created before this was posted. So it's a good chance that this password is actually vulnerable to this. So we're going to go ahead and copy this password. And we're going to use a tool called GPP Decrypt, which GPP is they're basically Microsoft's in-house encryption. And if we do that in there, we got a decrypted password. So GPP still standing strong, 2K18. Not so much anymore. So now we have this SVCTGS user and we have its password. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to try the SMB thing again. Let's see what we can do with this new user we have. So we're going to do the domain of active.htb. We'll do the user of svc tgs. Password of GPP still going strong, not so much. And the host of 10.10.10.100. Oh crap, what did I do? Oh, that's the great thing about live demos. Oh, I'm using the wrong program. I was using SMB map, not client. There we go. So now we got some more access to some user shares on this system. But since I actually have a user on this system, I kind of want to poke at this Active Directory thing now. So I'm going to go ahead and run a script called get AD users. So I'm going to try to get all the AD users on this system to figure out who exists on this system. Maybe there's something I can actually exploit on here. -dc 10.10.10.100. It's going to ask for a password. We're going to put in the password for the user, svc tgs. So now we see we got a couple users on here. We got KRB TGT, which is probably the Kerberos ticket granting ticket service. So it's probably the user that runs the Kerberos system. Then we also have the administrator. So we got some people on the system. So this is the point where we might want to try the Kerberos thing. So first of all, I need to figure out who on this system has an SPN associated with them. So we're going to run another script called get SPN user SPNs. So I'm going to run this script on the system, give it the domain with the user, and -dc-ip, the location of the server. Give it the password again. So now we figured out that the actual administrator in the system is associated with a service principal name. Well, we know that when you request a TGS for a service, it's encrypted with that user's credentials. So I'm thinking I could request access to this administrator and find out his ticket's encrypted with his credentials. So if I could crack that offline, I could probably become the administrator on the system. So if I do the same script, I could do request. Is it dash request? Oh, yeah, one dash. Put the password in again. And now we got this giant hash. So this is a hash for the ticket granting service. Basically, what you would want to do after this is take this entire part after this and run it against a program, John the Ripper, Hashcat, something that's going to crack this encryption. But if you were to actually crack this, because I'm not going to do that because it's going to freaking take forever, you would get that this password is Ticketmaster1968. So if we were to actually use this password, we can actually get onto the system. So if we do another script called wmiexec, so all these scripts I'm using are from a repository called Mpacket. It's got a lot of Active Directory tools on it. They have these specific scripts called psexec, wimexec. They're basically different ways to get onto the system of using certain things. I'm just using this one specifically. So we're going to do active.htb administrator, see if I spell that correctly. And we're going to give it the password and the system where it's at. So wimexec basically abuses SMB to get reverse shells out, and that's what it does. So if I do, who am I on the system? I am administrator. If I do net users administrator, you can see this guy's a domain admin. So just by cracking that one ticket, I now own this entire domain just by doing that one thing. And that's kind of the powerfulness of these whole domain exploits. A lot of exploits tend to go for the low-hanging fruit, kind of work their way through the system. These domain type exploits, they're 0 to 100 real fast. They're just, I want to own everything. Okay, I'm done. Cool. I own your system now. That's kind of how in a nutshell it works. All right.
It just takes one. It just takes one time. Like a sysadmin being lazy once, you know, and like throwing in a domain admin, running services domain admin, you know, and that's it.
Yep, that's what people make a mistake. You can set up everything correctly, but if you set up one thing wrong and it compromises your whole network, you might get fired. I'm sorry. I might be the one hacking you. I'm sorry.
Then the company might get run fired.
Yeah. Are all these tools standard on Kali? Yes, all those tools that I just used on there, those are already pre-compiled into Kali. So if you want to use all those Mpacket tools that I was using and the SMB tools, those are all automatically set up when you download Kali. And that is pretty much it. These are the blog posts that a lot of these attacks come through. I'll try to post a slide deck later. If you really want to know more about the nuances of how they discover these attacks and how it works really on the system level, I definitely recommend going and reading these. These are good reads. They're very good at explaining what they do. And that is it. Anybody questions or anything like that? If not, that is it for tonight.